Eskom says South Africans should brace themselves for longer periods of power cuts. It warns that it could escalate rolling blackouts to stage 6 from as early as this afternoon. That is 5 o'clock this afternoon. For more on this, I'm joined by Economist, senior economist at BNP Paribas, that is Jeff Schultz. Thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us. How concerned are you about the prospect of us enduring stage 6 load shedding from 5 o'clock this afternoon, given the impact that we've had from stages 2 and 4 in recent days?
Good afternoon, Nampu. Indeed, it is very concerning, and I think highlights, firstly, an extremely constrained system where Eskom, for the better part of this year, has been warning that the system is already heavily constrained. It's obviously now been exacerbated by some of the strike activity that's taking place at some of the power stations. But the bottom line is that this is very economically damaging. It's damaging to confidence. It's damaging to economic activity, of course. Our estimates put, every day of stage 4 load shedding costs the economy around 2 billion rand. Every day of stage 6 load shedding, which is kind of unprecedented in our history, would cost the economy up to 3 billion rand a day. So these are really concerning numbers.
Indeed, they are. Just in terms of the load shedding that we've experienced this year, how much has that cut economic growth by? If we didn't have this level of load shedding, how much more could we have grown by this year?
Look, I mean, right now, the run rate of load shedding year to date is already, I think, close on 65 to 70% of what we had last year in totality. And as we know, last year was a record year in terms of load shedding in the country. And so, these estimates really vary. But on average, we're saying that electricity supply cuts, let's say 100 days of severe load shedding, let's say stage 4 load shedding, could be costing this economy up to 2 to 2.5 percentage points of GDP. So, it's not to say that that's how much we've lost year to date, but just to put into perspective that 100 days of load shedding could potentially shave off up 2 to 2.5% of our GDP growth this year.
And then I suppose the difficulty as well is if people are seeking alternatives, I mean, basic things like generators, those might actually be difficult to come by, or they'll be in scarce supply, and then the prices of those will also shoot up.
Yes, I mean, I think there's an inflation aspect to this. There's also a supply chain aspect. Of course, globally, we are facing very severe supply chain pressures. And so I think actually being able to get hold of goods like generators, largely that are imported, is going to become a little bit more problematic. And of course, as you mentioned, I think could actually start to filter through into higher levels of inflation in the economy. A less productive economy is also not good news for inflation because it lowers productivity. And therefore raises the cost of doing business. So bottom line is whether or not it's from a dent to activity or a potential upside for domestic inflation, this is certainly not very good news.
Yeah. And if this continues and we possibly reach a blackout situation, obviously that would be very concerning. But it is worrying about what this means for 2023 and the years following that in terms of getting new capacity from things like renewable energy.
Well, I think what it highlights is that getting new generation capacity online as quickly as possible has to be the priority for the government. We have to get bid window 5 rolled off, bid window 6 coming, 7, 8, 9. We need as much renewable energy. We need as much baseload capacity coming online as quickly as possible in order to alleviate a lot of these structural constraints in the economy. As I mentioned earlier, if you're talking about a 2.5 percentage point reduction in GDP growth just because of load shedding, that is hurting our long-term potential growth in this economy, which we only believe is around 1% right now. So to answer your question for 2023, I think these structural growth challenges are going to become more acute over the next couple of months, because even if we get new renewable energy coming online, it takes some time before that filters into the grid. So next year, we only see growth of around 1% in this economy.
Yeah. Jeff, I did see something around your estimates for inflation and also interest rates. Do you believe that inflation is going to surpass the 7% level CPI, and that indeed the Reserve Bank may raise interest rates by 75 basis points in the next 2 coming meetings?
Yes, so we unfortunately believe that inflation is going to prove more problematic over the next 6 months. Inflation probably will surpass the 7% level in June and probably really struggle to come back below 7% until early next year. And that leaves the central bank in a very tricky position with structural constraints in the economy and weak economic activity, but at the same time, a hugely problematic, or at least problematic over the next 12 months, inflation picture. And we know that the central bank is a primary inflation targeter. And as a result, we believe that the SARB probably does need to act. And why it needs to act is rather to curtail the so-called second round price pressures in the economy. So for as long as we get persistence, higher inflation persistence in things like food and fuel prices, this starts to filter into things like wage demands, like what we're seeing at Eskom right now. And that starts to become more self-fulfilling and higher inflation down the line.
Well, if your forecast is correct or anywhere close, then I guess we can kiss economic growth goodbye then.
Well, look, I don't actually think that that's the case. Bearing in mind that this economy so far year to date has actually surpassed expectations, despite the weak structural constraints in the economy. Q1 GDP looked really, really good, much better than most analysts had expected. Yes, that momentum might slow down from the second quarter of the year, but I also think that, curtailing inflation and ensuring that we have a very low, stable inflation rate is also somewhat supportive of household disposable incomes down the line. And that is why we believe the central bank probably needs to act a little bit more aggressively with 75 basis points in the next two meetings to really curtail these. So it's not to say that growth is completely gone in this economy over the next 12 to 18 months. What we really need to be focused on is addressing the structural rigidities in the economy. As I mentioned earlier, getting new energy capacity online as quickly as possible would be a great first step.
Jeff, thank you very much for giving us your time and insights there. Jeff Schultz, he's a senior economist at BNP Paribas South Africa.